You know, it's so funny. I'd say that I'm not even supposed to be here today, but I've been putting off this video so long that I feel like you can already dock my pay on this. Hi everyone, I'm Ben, your underground conductor, and welcome to Underground Cinema. This week we'll be talking about the 1994 indie classic, Clerks. Now I have to be honest with all of you, I've been really anxious to cover this movie. Clerks is one of my favorite films of all time. I first saw it about 4 or 5 years ago when I was still in college, and like so many other people, it immediately spoke to me. I found the film so relatable and compelling, and I've only related to this film more and more as time has gone on. This is a film that I've been wanting to cover ever since I started this channel, and since the 30th anniversary of the film was last month, I figured this would be the perfect time to cover it. Although, now that I'm finally here doing the recording, as excited as I am to talk about Clerks, I have to admit I'm actually really nervous. There's just so much I really want to talk about when it comes to this film, and I'm genuinely really afraid that I'm going to leave out something really integral. Now, I typically make notes whenever I review a film, because there's always specific points that I want to cover and certain details in the plot that I want to bring up. But typically, I never do more than a page of notes for the film I'm reviewing. For Clerks, though, I did 3 pages. The only time I ever take this many notes is when I'm critiquing someone's script. There's just so much I want to talk about when it comes to this film, not only in regards to the film itself, but also to the life of Kevin Smith and also how this film spoke to me specifically. Now, many of you may know this, but Clerks is the directorial debut of pop culture icon Kevin Smith. He made this film when he was about 23, 24 years old. Now, I've already mentioned in depth in my 430 movie review how much I adore Kevin Smith, but I never really brought up why. And it's primarily because I find his story as a filmmaker to be incredibly inspiring, and the events leading up to him making this film are actually incredibly interesting. In his teens, Kevin Smith did a lot of gig work, primarily busing jobs. But seeking experience in something more consistent, unrelated to contracting, he decided to start working at convenience stores. Eventually, he landed a job at Quick Stop Groceries, which was the only convenience store in Leonardo, New Jersey, and he hated that job. He actually wanted to work for the video store that was next to Quick Stop. It was owned by the same guy, but he was pretty much fooled in the interview. Kevin Smith worked at the Quick Stop for a few years until his early 20s. On his 21st birthday, August 2nd, 1991, Kevin Smith went to see Slacker, the second film from famous indie director Richard Linklater. And the incredibly experimental nature of Slacker just really inspired Kevin Smith to make a film. The way Kevin Smith puts it, apparently seeing Slacker lit a fire under his ass. It was in that moment that Kevin Smith fully realized that he wanted to be a filmmaker. So after that, Kevin Smith got the ball rolling on his filmmaking journey. He applied to Vancouver Film School, got in. He filmed a goodbye video to his parents, and then went off. At film school, he met a lot of people that would be integral to the future of his career, including his longtime producing partner, Scott Mosier. And after coming back home to New Jersey, Kevin Smith went to talk to his old boss at the Quick Stop, Tarlachin Tapar, asking if he could shoot a film there, and Kevin Smith decided to begin production on Clerks, which is really the epitome of an underground indie film. Clerks only cost $27,575 to make. Kevin Smith financed the film himself by taking out 12 different credit cards and selling his entire comic book collection, and made sure to cast all the actors locally to save as much money as possible. Now, Clerks as a film was inspired heavily by other works of fiction. I've already mentioned Slacker, but another film that Kevin Smith took inspiration from was Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. He was impressed that Do the Right Thing took place almost all in one day, so as a result, decided to set Clerks also all in one day. However, another inspiration of Clerks that is seldom ever talked about is the Divine Comedy. Now, the Divine Comedy is a trilogy of epic poems written by Dante Alighieri that's all about taking a journey through the afterlife. The most famous section of this trilogy would be the first part, Inferno, where Dante takes a journey into hell. And when you look at Clerks, it's more or less structured like that. Hence why the main character's name is actually Dante Hicks, and why so much of the film centers around this sort of dismal reality he's living in. Going into the film, though, Clerks is not one-to-one exactly like Inferno. While Inferno takes you through a journey through the 9 circles of hell, Clerks is split up into 16 distinct parts. Apparently the film was actually supposed to be broken up into 9 parts, but Kevin Smith was concerned about what the final fate of the film would be, so he broke it up into 16 instead, with different title cards that would give an allusion to what was happening in the film at that time. Now, the first title card of the film actually gives us the name of our central character, Dante. Dante, for some reason, is asleep in the closet of his house, and you see that his dog is actually laying on his bed. Dante gets a phone call asking him if he can come in to work even though it's his day off. He's reluctant to do this because he actually has a hockey game planned that day for 2 p.m., but because Dante is a people pleaser, he agrees to take on the opening shift so long as he can leave by noon. And this is where we begin our film, with him going into work on his day off, preparing everything, and this is most likely meant to be metaphorical for Dante beginning his descent into hell. After Dante opens up the shop, we get to part 2, vilification. Dante serves the first customer of the day, who appears to be some sort of sales rep who's buying coffee. Another character walks in asking for cigarettes, and the rep then proceeds to pull out a rotting organ, saying that it is the lung of a deceased smoker. In reality, the actual prop that they used was like a cat's liver that they had rolled around in dirt. The rep then says that the kids should chew bubblegum instead, and starts making this really big scene at the quick stop. This part is clearly called vilification because you have this one character who is vilifying cigarettes, and by proxy the person selling those cigarettes, Dante. We then proceed to part 3 of Clerks, which is titled Jay and Silent Bob, where we meet the characters of Jay and Silent Bob. Jay and Silent Bob, played by Jason Mewes and the film's director Kevin Smith respectively, are local drug dealers who hang outside of the quick stop. The two of them are really just the classic stoner duo, very much in the same vein as like Cheech and Chong or Harold and Kumar. And those two characters also connect many of Kevin Smith's films together, as they end up appearing in almost all of Kevin Smith's films, establishing a solid link for what would later become the Askew universe, which is the third cinematic universe to ever exist in film history, right behind the Universal Monsterverse and the Toho Godzillaverse. Just amazing that Kevin Smith was able to do that. Suck it, Marvel Studios. Kevin Smith beat you. Side note, a piece of trivia I found interesting. According to Kevin Smith, he actually talked about this on the Joe Rogan Experience. The characters of Jay and Silent Bob specifically were actually based on 2 characters from one of his favorite childhood movies, Strange Brew, starring Rick Moranis and Dave Thomas. Kevin Smith has said definitively that the characters of Jay and Silent Bob would not exist without the characters of Bob and Doug McKenzie. And watching Strange Brew, you definitely get that vibe. Although ironically, the McKenzie brothers aren't stoners, they're alcoholics. Of course, one vice for another. Anyway, after being introduced to Jay and Silent Bob, we pivot back to the quick stop as a crowd of angry customers are just getting ready to maul Dante. And that is where Dante's girlfriend shows up, Veronica, played by Marilyn Gigliotti. She breaks up the crowd, demands to know who started this whole thing, and that's where we find out that the sales rep who started this whole thing was actually a bubblegum sales rep, trying to boost gum sales. Veronica and Dante then sit together, enjoying each other's company. Dante is painting her nails. Veronica is encouraging Dante to go back to school and leave this job, which he very clearly hates. And eventually the conversation just leads to them talking about sex. Because of course it does. Now, is this conversation because at this point in Inferno, Dante would be in the lust circle of hell? Or is it because you have 2 horny 20-something-year-old characters who are dating? I'll let you decide. They then get into like a small argument over their respective sexual experiences because apparently Dante has slept with 12 different girls while Veronica's only slept with 3 different guys. So she feels like Dante's a bit of a pig. However, this conversation is broken up when a customer named Willem shows up. Willem, played by Scott Mosier. Willem's nickname is apparently Snowball, and the reason his nickname is Snowball is because of a specific fetish that he has regarding blowjobs. The slang term snowball itself had apparently actually come from like a friend of Kevin Smith, and it just made its way into this film. Anyway, Veronica then reveals that the reason she knows about Willem's fetish is because she has, I'll be frank, she sucked his dick. Dante gets upset about this because she didn't mention him in the list of guys that she slept with, and it's because she didn't sleep with him. She just blew him. Dante gets even more heated and demands to know how many guys she's blown. And, it's 37. She sucked 37 dicks.
37. My girlfriend sucked 37 dicks.
In a row?
It's one of the funniest moments in the film, and obviously it makes sense why Dante is so upset with this. Veronica leaves. However, looking back on that moment in the film, while I don't think that Dante was necessarily overreacting, based on the context of the situation, I do feel like he was being hypocritical about the situation, and I'll get back to that in a bit. Moving on from that, though, we go into part 4 of the film, Randall, where we meet the character Randall. Randall is Dante's best friend. He works in the video store next to the quick stop. And as a character, he's sort of like this guide for Dante, trying to help him open up and loosen up. Just like in any film, he's just sort of trying to smooth out Dante's rough edges. Now, what's interesting about Randall is that he's ostensibly the protagonist of the film. It's actually really funny that Randall is the protagonist in this film, because not only does he show up 20 minutes into the runtime of the film, but in the film itself, he actually shows up late to work. So he's late in the narrative, and also late in the narrative. And while he doesn't show up until like 20 minutes into the film's runtime, he almost takes over the entire film. He's a very commanding character. He easily has the most agency in this entire narrative, and is also the catalyst for a lot of the conflict in this film. Another thing to note is that Randall's position in the story as sort of this guiding force for Dante can be seen as sort of synonymous to the character of Virgil from Inferno, who helps guide Dante through the afterlife. It's also pretty fitting that Randall is a wordsmith, he's a blabbermouth, and has sort of like this grand but cynical understanding of the world around him, because Virgil in Inferno was a poet who himself foretold many things. Just another tie-in between Clerks and the Divine Comedy. Anywho, Randall opens up the video store, wins a bet with a girl that he basically fooled, insults an old man that he refers to as Dr. Jones, which is obviously a reference to Indiana Jones, specifically Temple of Doom, since Randall's doing a short round impression. And that's where we get to part 5 of this narrative, syntax. Now, this section of the film is likely called syntax because it has the 2 best conversations in the film. Not only are they well structured, but they're engaging and entertaining. The first conversation is between Randall and Dante regarding Dante's past relationship with Caitlin compared to his current relationship with Veronica. Now, during this conversation between Randall and Dante, Caitlin as an individual is characterized to be some sort of vile woman, a succubus who just fed off Dante until he was a husk. However, based on the information we find out during this conversation, this is where I actually wanted to bring up the hypocrisy that exists within Dante's character. So we find out in this dialogue that Dante dated his ex-girlfriend Caitlin for 5 years. Apparently during this 5-year relationship, she cheated on him 8.5 times. Meanwhile, he's been dating Veronica for 7 months. Now, Dante, in this film, is 22 years old. Apparently he broke up with Caitlin 3 years ago, which means he broke up with her when he was 19, and the 2 of them dated for 5 years, which means they started dating when they were both 14. Now, I don't know if Kevin Smith intended this, but this is just something I've noticed for the first time on my, 6th or 7th rewatch of this film. Dante says that he's slept with 12 different girls, many of them in high school. He's dated Veronica for 7 months, and as far as we know, he's been faithful to her, even though he's been having phone calls with his ex-girlfriend. And him and Caitlin dated from the ages of 14 to 19. So putting together all that information, that means that Dante has 100% cheated on Caitlin. Not only that, but depending on which relationship fell where, he probably cheated on Caitlin as much, if not more, than she cheated on him. So keeping that all in mind, Dante is basically an infidel. in the purest possible term. Which means when Veronica called him a pig earlier in the movie, not only was that accurate, but that was probably too nice of a term. Dante is purely a hypocrite. Like, he's upset over all these arguments that him and Veronica have been having, and he's idealizing this relationship that he had in high school that was clearly toxic and unhealthy, but he's also failing to acknowledge the fact that he was just as bad as his ex. Because unless Dante and Caitlin had, like, several breaks throughout their 5-year relationship where Dante got, like, a hall pass or something, then, no, he's just as bad as her. Anywho, during the conversation that Dante has with Randall, that's where we actually get to what is probably the central conflict of the film. Dante's found out that Caitlin has actually gotten engaged, and he's completely dumbfounded by this whole situation, and has no idea how to respond to it. After finding out, though, him and Randall have an amazing conversation about Star Wars, where they discuss the concept of political apathy in relation to independent contractors who worked on the second Death Star in Return of the Jedi, which is just amazing. Then a real-life contractor, a roofer, gets involved in the conversation and points out how any of the contractors working on the Death Star would have known the risks of taking on a government contract, and would have actually looked at their politics before taking the job. This dialogue is so amazing, not just from a nerd perspective, but also because you get this sort of metaphorical argument regarding the political affiliations of blue-collar workers, and what's more important, their bottom line and ability to feed their families, or the overarching oppressive political system that governs over them. It's such an amazing dialogue, and is also probably one of the most memorable moments from this movie. We then get to part 6 of the film, Vagary. After Randall has insulted a customer at RST Video, he goes over to Quick Stop to hang out with Dante, and they notice that a guy is standing in the corner who's looking for the perfect carton of eggs. This guy is played by Walt Flanagan, who has 4 different roles in this movie, many of which you would not notice unless you were paying close attention. The dude's a chameleon. Now, the reason he was cast in so many roles is because this was an ultra-low-budget project, and they couldn't afford multiple actors for what would be very small scene-to-scene roles. However, Walt Flanagan's versatility in this film actually led to many people on set, including Kevin Smith, referring to him as the Lon Chaney of the 90s. Lon Chaney obviously being the famous horror actor from the silent era of filmmaking, famous for morphing his appearance from role to role. Side note, I've mentioned this before, Walt Flanagan in this movie looks exactly like Peter Jackson in Bad Taste, which is just, I can't get over that. It's hilarious. And he looks even more like Peter Jackson when he's wearing Kevin Smith's glasses. Anyway, the reason this section is called Vagary is because of the odd behavior of this one customer looking for a carton of eggs. You then have another customer come by, who's actually played by Kevin Smith's sister, who says that she's seen this behavior before and that it's very common with school guidance counselors, that they just go crazy and look for perfection everywhere they go. She then says that this isn't something that you should be concerned about, and that if you don't want to end up like that, you should look for meaningful work, like what she does, masturbating animals. We then get to part 7 of the film, Purgation, which refers to cleansing oneself. This section of the film begins with Randall selling a pack of cigarettes to a 4-year-old. Pay attention to that, that's going to come back later. And then him and Dante have a conversation about how much they hate the customers at their respective stores. This is sort of just a venting session for these characters, as they're sort of cleansing themselves of frustration. It's actually funny, because one of the customers that they complain about in this scene is a woman who's looking for, like, the perfect gallon of milk that won't spoil. And that woman is actually played by Kevin Smith's mother. Once again, cost saving. We then get to part 8 of the film, Malaise. Halfway there, hope you guys are still with me. In this part of the film, Dante finds out that the co-worker that he was covering the opening shift for, Arthur, has actually left the state and gone to Vermont. So Dante is stuck at the Quick Stop until closing, and he now cannot go to the hockey game that he planned to have today. Obviously, he's not happy about this, but then proceeds to do a little bit of insubordination to solve the problem. He shuts down the Quick Stop for about an hour, and has all of his friends come over so they can play hockey on the roof. Things go well for about 12 minutes, until another customer, played by Scott Mosier, comes by demanding that Dante open up the store so he can shop. He proceeds to insult Dante's playstyle and says that he wants to get in on this game. They start a new cycle with this guy, and this guy, out of spite, immediately hits the ball off the roof, like a dick. Turns out they only had 1 ball to play, so they only had a 12-minute game. And Dante is left discontent again, once again reinforcing this sense of malaise. It's actually quite interesting when you consider how upset Dante is throughout this entire section of the film. Because I'd say that outside of the conclusion of the film, he's more angry during malaise than any other part of this narrative. Which you could say is evident of his descent into the fifth level of hell, wrath. We then get to part 9 of Clerks, Harbinger. So called that because Randall is the harbinger of so much bad news. This part of the film begins with an old man asking Dante if he could use the restroom. Also pay attention to that because that comes back later. After that though, Randall comes to tell Dante that Julie Dwyer, a girl that they went to high school with, has passed away. She died in the YMCA pool. Dante is broken up by this because he actually used to date Julie Dwyer. She was the 6th woman he ever slept with. They find out that the wake is actually that day, and hearing this news, the two of them decide to shut down the quick stop again to drive to the funeral. And during this drive, Randall actually tells Dante the story of his cousin Walter, who accidentally broke his own neck trying to blow himself. Another interesting piece of trivia, that cousin that Randall's talking about, Walter, is the same cousin that Brody talks about in Mallrats, the one who stuck a gerbil up his ass. We actually find out this information in a quick stop comic that came out last year. Funny thing, I actually have all 4 of those comics right here. And I'm pretty sure this is the one where we find out that Randall and Brody actually share a cousin. I'll be honest, it's been a while since I've read it. Anyway, Randall and Dante get to the wake to pay their respects, and they proceed to run out 5 minutes later. We don't see what happens because, as it turns out, Kevin Smith didn't have permission to film inside the funeral parlor. In fact, he actually didn't even have permission to film outside the funeral parlor. So we just have a quick cut to 5 minutes later. There was a scene written for the funeral parlor, though, which shows Randall and Dante accidentally knocking over Julie Dwyer's casket. And while this scene was never filmed, it was later put in a comic book, and Kevin Smith actually went back years later and had the actors Brian O'Halloran and Jeff Anderson do the voice acting for the scene, and then they just animated the whole thing and put it on the 10th anniversary DVD, which I have right here. It's a great scene. Unfortunately, it's not in the original cut of the movie, so I'm not going to talk about it. However, what I will say is that the animation style for this lost scene is the same animation style as the Clerks animated series. Another thing I realized after rewatching the film and thinking about it, and I don't know if I'm grasping at straws or not, but they arrive back at the quick stop from the funeral at about the midpoint of the film. And in Dante's Inferno, the middle section of hell that separates the lesser sins from the greater sins would be the city of Dis, aka the 6th circle of heresy. And in the circle of heresy, heretics are punished by being put in a coffin forever that is set on fire. And they're also condemned to only see the future but never the present. Now, even though they didn't shoot the scene, they do mention in the film that the characters knocked over Julie's casket. And we actually find out in the next film, Mallrats, that the reason why Julie Dwyer was doing laps at the YMCA pool before she died is because she was obsessed with her appearance and wanted to look good for a TV show that she was going to be on the next day. She was only focusing on the future and not the present, and that's how she died. Once again, I don't know if that's me grasping at straws or not. I just thought about it during the editing process and thought it was worth putting in. We then get to part 10 of Clerks, Perspicacity. So called that because, as mentioned, Randall has a grand amount of insight into the human experience in the most blunt and cynical way possible. In this section of the film, Randall spits water in a customer's face just to prove a point to Dante about how title does not dictate behavior. Individuals dictate their own behavior, which is true. Of course, the reason he's doing this is just to convince Dante to give him the keys to his car. That way Randall can go shop for movies at a different video store, despite the fact that he works in one. Funny thing, the video store that Randall goes to in this film, he calls it Big Choice Video. It was actually a real video store that existed in the early 90s called Choice Video. It was in Middletown, New Jersey, and sadly actually shut down in 1994. Just a sign of things to come. We then get to part 11 of Clerks, Paradigm. So called that because at this point in the film, we're just showing the continuing pattern of Dante being miserable. Dante is engaged with a customer that he actually went to high school with named Rick Darris, and Rick Darris is criticizing Dante based on his lack of physical shape. Apparently after high school, Rick Darris became a personal trainer. We then see a girl walk in named Heather Jones, who continues commenting on Dante's meek appearance. Turns out, as we find out in this film, Heather Jones is actually the younger sister of Alyssa Jones, who is Joey Lauren Adams' character from Chasing Amy. Another thing to note is that the character of Alyssa was actually written into this film initially. She was supposed to be in that funeral scene that was not filmed, but later animated. And Joey Lauren Adams actually did come back later to voice Alyssa for the animated version of that scene, which is pretty cool. You know why I'm bringing up that one scene too much, I'm just gonna move on. Anyway, as Dante's getting insulted, a health agent walks in and gives Dante a $500 fine. The reason he gives Dante this fine is because earlier in the film, as mentioned, Randall sold cigarettes to a 4-year-old. And because Dante was technically the one who opened that day, he gets the fine. Things really could not look worse for Dante at this point. He got called into work on his day off, his hockey game went south, one of his ex-girlfriends died, he got insulted for his appearance, and he's gotten a large fine for a crime he didn't even commit. Things are looking pretty bad for him, but at the last moment, things start to look up as Caitlin, Dante's ex-girlfriend, the one who's getting married, pops in. Turns out she took the train down to New Jersey for 8 hours just to see Dante and ease his insecurity, because she figured that Dante would have seen the newspaper article announcing her engagement. As it turns out, Caitlin is not engaged. Her boyfriend proposed to her, but she wasn't sure if she wanted to say yes. However, Caitlin's mother was so excited about the whole thing that she's the one who actually took out the article in the paper. Caitlin tells Dante that she's going to give her boyfriend's ring back because she doesn't want to get married. She feels like she's done too much work and gone to school too long to just wind up as someone's housewife. She also says that she wants to give it another try with Dante, and the two of them agree to go on a date that night, despite the fact that Dante is currently dating Veronica. Once again, hammering home the fact that Dante is in fact an infidel. Another thing worth bringing up, I feel, is that Caitlin is actually played by the actress Lisa Spoonhour, who was ever only in 2 films, Clerks, and a 1997 film called Bartender, directed by Gabe Torres and written by Robert Zamierowski. Now, as of recording, Bartender is currently considered to be a piece of lost media. There is no known full-length copy of the film anywhere. People have been searching for it ever since Lisa Spoonhour unfortunately passed away a few years ago, and rightfully so, because Lisa Spoonhour is amazing in this film. Caitlin's character only shows up for about 10 minutes of screen time, but she makes such an impact, and Lisa Spoonhour is so funny. And while I do know that Bartender isn't a comedy, I would like to see it just to see what she brings to the role that she was cast for that. So yeah, if anyone ever comes across a copy of Bartender, please send it my way. I want to see it, and maybe even review it. Moving on, we then get to part 12 of Clerks, Whimsy, most likely called that because of the playful dialogue between Caitlin and Randall. Caitlin has come back for her date, while Randall is sitting at the counter watching hermaphroditic. The two of them actually have a borderline flirty conversation with each other, which is quite interesting, but the conversation itself wraps up with Randall saying if Caitlin breaks Dante's heart again, he'll kill her, which really just shows the amount of loyalty that Randall has as a character. Despite the fact that he's a shit talker who doesn't really like people, the dude is there where it really counts, which I find interesting. Another thing to note is that the two of them do have very great chemistry in this scene, and like I said, they are very flirty. And it's funny because after Clerks, Lisa Spoonhour and Jeff Anderson, who plays Randall, actually got engaged. What's even funnier is that in the original commentary for Clerks, Kevin Smith talks about how the two of them found love on the set of this film, and he jokes around saying he's curious to see who finds love on the set of Mallrats. And as it turns out, it was him. After Mallrats, Kevin Smith started dating the actress Joey Lauren Adams. We then get to part 13 of Clerks, Quandary. And the quandary in this part of the film is who Caitlin. You see, Dante has changed and just arrived back at the quick stop. Randall is still sitting there watching the and Caitlin comes strutting out of the bathroom, feeling a sense of relief. As she says, "Oh, Dante, you were amazing. You've never just let me do all the work like that before." And Dante's confused because he just arrived. Obviously, everyone is concerned because Caitlin has just had sex with somebody. So who has she had sex with? Turns out that old guy from earlier who asked to use the bathroom had a heart attack while masturbating and died. And because of rigor mortis, blood stiffens up after death, and he died with an erection. He just kept it for hours. So Caitlin had sex with a dead guy. Like, I have no idea if Kevin Smith intended it, but the whole ordeal just feels a lot like that one scene in Weekend at Bernie's. If you know, you know. Anyway, they put Caitlin in an ambulance because obviously she's in shock. The coroner is explaining to Randall and Dante exactly what happened here. During the conversation, she mentions that she also examined the body of Randall's dead cousin Walter, the one who tried to blow himself. But yeah, suffice to say, Dante's date for the night is ruined. This brings us to part 14 of Clerks. Lamentation. Because obviously, at this point in the day, Dante is just done with everything. He feels like life has done nothing to offer him a raw deal, and while he doesn't say it, it's very clear that this is very likely the worst day of his life. Randall, during this scene, tells Dante that he should do something about it. That if he's unhappy with his life, he should change it. If he's unhappy with his job, he should look for a better one. And Dante, being a complacent individual, is convinced that he cannot make all these grand changes in his life because he simply cannot risk the comfortable situation that he's in for, quote, the big money and the fabulous prizes. Dante then explains how he's just always been like this, how even when he was a 3-year-old and his potty lid was closed, instead of just making the effort to lift it up and be comfortable, he shat himself. It's just sort of an unfortunate state for his character. It just really shows you how a character like this gets stuck in complacency and can't really pull themselves out of it, which is apparently similar to Kevin Smith's own experience working at Quick Stop when he was a teenager. He felt like he was trapped there. And that brings us into part 15 of Clerks, Juxtaposition. Finally, Jay and Silent Bob themselves have come in for the day to make their purchase. The two of them have a conversation with Dante about life and women. Jay says that Dante seems pretty lucky because his girlfriend brings him lasagna and rubs his neck. Meanwhile, every girlfriend Jay's ever had has just wanted drugs from him. And then Silent Bob has his signature one line per movie and says that there's a million fine-looking women in the world, and most of them don't make you lasagna. Most of them just cheat on you. In this moment, Dante realizes that Veronica really is the perfect woman for him, that he loves her. But, as the title card would suggest, this realization is juxtaposed with the tail end of a conversation that Veronica is having with Randall, where Randall has told Veronica, listen, Dante has never gotten Caitlin out of his system. It seems like he wanted to break up with you. I just want to give you a heads up. And it's so funny that this scene is coming so late in the film, because in this moment, while he's not intending to, the very loyal character of Randall is betraying Dante, which once again harkens back to Inferno. Because while Virgil never betrays Dante, the lowest layer of hell in Inferno is reserved for traitors. And I just find it interesting that the main character's best friend has unintentionally betrayed him near the conclusion of a narrative that was structured around Dante's Inferno. Not only that, but the juxtaposition of the narrative here actually goes beyond the film itself. Because, as mentioned, Randall shares the similar role of guide with Virgil from Inferno, and both of them guide their respective Dantes through their journey with the end goal of ending up with the right woman. In Clerks, Randall's trying to make Dante realize the whole time that Veronica is the one for him, and with Inferno, Virgil's trying to guide Dante to Beatrice. But while Virgil is steadfast in guiding Dante to this ultimate end goal of true love, Randall has essentially conceded at this point and realizes that Dante just isn't seeing what's best for himself. Anyway, Veronica barges into the Quick Stop, dumps Dante, saying that she's sick of his uncertainty and misery and obviously his infidelity, and says that she's going to go out in the town and enjoy herself because Dante can't make up his mind, and Caitlin's just going to break his heart again, and she's just going to laugh when that happens. We then get to part 16, Catharsis, the final release for these characters, where Randall and Dante have a big fight over the breakup that's just occurred. At the end of the fight, Dante laments again, and says his famous maxim for this film, I'm not even supposed to be here today. Randall has become completely sick of this, and at this point basically tells Dante, dude, shut up. All you've done is complain all day. You didn't have to come in, you could have said no. You didn't have to work here, you could have gone back to college or found a different job. You didn't have to lie to your current girlfriend about getting back together with your previous one. That's all you. Randall at this point in the film just tells Dante to basically take responsibility for his life, which, while very blunt and a little on the nose, feels very appropriate not only based on who these characters are, but the build-up that's happened throughout this entire film. And remember how I said that this film was told in 16 parts? Well, I lied, because there actually is a part 17, although it's very brief. Part 17 is called Denouement, where all the threads of the film come together. Randall and Dante have cleaned up the store together, they've apparently made up and forgiven each other. Randall asks Dante if he'd like him to try to smooth things over with Veronica. Dante says, no, I'll handle it, I'll do something for myself for once. And the film just ends with everything tied up in a nice neat bow. Every element except for one thing. So Clerks actually has an original ending that was cut from the final film. At the end of the original cut of Clerks, Dante actually gets shot in a convenience store robbery and dies. And it's supposed to be like this ultimate ironic twist to the fact that he wasn't even supposed to be there that day. When Clerks was initially distributed, though, it was deemed that it was probably best to take that scene out. And I agree. While that original ending obviously is very impactful and ties a lot of the themes together, it is kind of a punch in the gut and doesn't really leave much optimism or room for future storytelling. And there obviously are future stories, as there are sequels to Clerks, and there is a Clerks animated series. That being said, though, for the 10th anniversary edition of Clerks, they actually did include the first cut of the film with the original ending left in, as well as several different deleted scenes. If you guys would like me to do a review on that at some point, please let me know. Because as we all know from Zack Snyder, an extended cut of a film could fundamentally change the whole thing. But yeah, the film ends, and we see in the credits the first teaser tag saying that Jay and Silent Bob will return in Dogma, which would be Kevin Smith's fourth film. And that end tag obviously being a callback to like old 1940s film serials, and also like the James Bond movies from the 60s. And those tags in the modern day have obviously been used in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in most of their films, saying, oh, this character will return, the Avengers will return, Iron Man will return, Star-Lord will return, etc., etc., etc. Funny thing, the song that plays in the credits of Clerks is a song called Can't Even Tell by Soul Asylum. And something interesting I wanted to bring up is that Kevin Smith actually shot the music video for that song. And the music video originally was going to have a bigger budget than the movie itself, which is absolutely hilarious. Fortunately, Kevin Smith was actually able to shoot the music video for roughly half of the original film's budget, but still. Another thing is that the lead singer of Soul Asylum, Dave Pirner, at the time Clerks came out, was actually dating Winona Ryder, interestingly enough. Just something completely unrelated I thought was worth bringing up. But yeah, that was Clerks. Like I said, I love Clerks so much. It is one of my favorite films of all time for a lot of reasons. For one thing, the movie is absolutely gorgeous to look at. Choosing to make the movie in black and white was an inspired choice, especially since I've seen people's attempts to colorize Clerks, and while it looks good, it doesn't have quite the same flavor as the black and white. And there's multiple reasons for why Kevin Smith chose to shoot Clerks in black and white. He actually explains explicitly why in Clerks 3. Because of all the conflicting colors that you would find in a convenience store, the audience's eyes would get confused, sort of like how colorful my background is. Good thing you can't see that right now. Kevin Smith also pointed out how filming the movie in black and white also offered subtle commentary on the soulless nature of consumerism, as well as subconsciously communicating to the audience that the events that you're seeing are being filmed by a hidden security camera. Adding on to that, though, I think shooting the film in black and white also adds to the audience's understanding of the complexity of these characters. There's a great quote regarding filmmaking and photography from Ted Grant, where he says that if you shoot people in color, you're photographing their clothes, but if you shoot them in black and white, you're photographing their souls. And that is definitely true. When you see a film in black and white, especially when it's intentionally shot in black and white, typically what the filmmaker wants you to do is to pay specific attention at the characters rather than what's going on in the background. When you do this, you're able to notice very specific things that help add to the characters, like facial expressions or body language. It was an inspired choice. And not only that, I think the black and white also foreshadows the original ending, the one that they didn't end up going with, where Dante dies. Black and white is typically used as a tinting to commemorate a deceased individual. Something else I love about Clerks is this concept of a shared history that is explored in a lot of Kevin Smith's movies. Kevin Smith's early films almost exclusively take place in New Jersey or about people from New Jersey. There's a sense of strong interconnectivity between the characters in this universe. And the reason they share that strong connection is because they all grew up in the same community. They share a history with each other, and that is how the characters in these films relate to each other. Like I mentioned earlier, there's so many small references in this film to previous events, like the fact that Dante had a relationship with a deceased character named Julie Dwyer. Rick Darris, the personal trainer character in this film, mentions that he was one of the guys that his girlfriend Caitlin slept with. We meet Alyssa Jones's little sister in this movie, and obviously she becomes a bigger character later on. You have all these characters that share a history with each other. It binds them together like the Force. And another thing about shared histories is that they're not written down. The history only stays alive as long as the people in the community stay alive. That's why the death of Julie Dwyer is such a significant event in this universe and why it's referenced, I think, in like 3 or 4 of Kevin Smith's films. Because she was part of this community of New Jersey kids. And when she died, part of that history died with her. And there's no real way to recover that history. It's just gone. Forever. Shared histories are just so integral to the way we socialize and interact with the community around us. And ever since I first got into Kevin Smith's filmography, that has become a concept that I've not only become incredibly intrigued with, but also related to heavily, because I also grew up in a small town. I still talk to people I went to high school with, and I still reminisce from time to time about things that we used to do. It helps you as an individual feel like you belong somewhere. Not only that, but in a filmmaking sense, it also helps this universe feel lived in. It's often the case with so many amateur projects that it feels like the story begins when the camera starts rolling. But not with Clerks. With Clerks, there's a strong sense that this is a universe that already exists, that these are characters that already live day to day doing things. And I think that's an incredibly strong element of this film. Another thing I really admire about Clerks is how well it hides its budget. Like I said, this movie was only shot for $27,575. Ridiculously cheap even for the time. You take that and you compare it to Kevin Smith's next film, Mallrats. I think Mallrats was shot for like $6.1 million. Like, $27,000 sounds like a lot of money, but when you consider the fact that filmmaking is a collaborative art form, you have to get all these people together, you have to rent or buy equipment. It's just a massive undertaking, and the fact that he was able to do it by the skin of his teeth is remarkable. And for a lot of it, you really cannot tell that it's shot for that small of an amount of money. The film covers its seams really well. For instance, this is something that I would have never noticed if I hadn't listened to the film commentary. During that scene where the old man is asking Dante to use the bathroom, that was one long shot, and in the theatrical cut of the film, you see the old man come back to Dante 3 times. But in the original shot, the old man comes back 4 times. So when they were editing the film and they wanted to add a cut to shorten that scene, what they did is that they just intercut it with footage of Jay and Silent Bob outside, which is an amazingly clever way not to break your continuity. So especially since there's so many different cutaways in Clerks, it just fits right in. You don't even notice. Another aspect of Clerks that I think is worth bringing up that's semi-related to the budget. Because most of the film takes place in a single location, it gives the film almost a stage play quality. This stage play quality is obviously reinforced by the several different chapter sections that break up the film. Each of the terms that populate the film, like vilification, malaise, denouement, catharsis, those are all theatrical terms. And considering the fact that Kevin Smith was a theater kid in high school, it makes perfect sense why the film would be broken up like this, but also why it would have this sort of stage play quality. It isn't just because it's cheaper to shoot in one location, but it shows how Kevin Smith was at the time using his strengths and experience in the arts to tell this story. And the fact that you stay engaged the entire time while barely going anywhere is a testament to how much this film does with so little. Clerks isn't a perfect movie though. Something to note is that while all the characters in the story feel very distinct, which is good, by the way, very good, a lot of the dialogue does sound very similar. Now, Brian O'Halloran, who plays Dante, when he signed on to this film, noted how witty and poignant the script felt. And I would agree with that. I think overall the dialogue in Clerks is actually pretty spectacular. Most of the lines are not only insanely memorable, but very quotable. I'm actually a big fan of Kevin Smith's style of dialogue in general. Most other filmmakers would avoid the direct approach when it comes to dialogue between characters in favor of something more nuanced. But what Kevin Smith does is that he transforms lines that would otherwise be considered blunt and on the nose, utilizing the dialogue to not only reveal the short-sighted nature of most of his characters, but also perpetuate the conflict rather than resolve it. It's a very honest style of dialogue writing, and writing like that is what helped make Clerks as well as Kevin Smith's other early films feel so fresh. However, you do have to keep in mind that Kevin Smith didn't really have any experience when he made Clerks, and when you look at the dialogue for that film, most of it feels like it's coming from a singular voice, which it is, it's coming from Kevin Smith. But I do feel like in most of this film, the characters are primarily distinguished by their performances and less so the dialogue. I think the only exception to this rule would be the character of Randall, who does talk mostly differently from the other characters. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Kevin Smith wrote the character of Randall for himself to play. He just found that Jeff Anderson was a better performer. Another thing I wanted to bring up and I'm fully willing to admit that this is 100% a nitpick, is that there's a few instances in this film where you hear the actors giving a line read during a scene, and they either almost trip over their lines, or they do trip over their lines. I noticed this with Dante at 22 minutes and 44 seconds, with the health agent at the 1 hour 43 second mark, and the coroner character at 1 hour 15 minutes and 39 seconds. And once again, I'll be perfectly fair, this is a nitpick. Most of the people in this film were not professional actors. They were either friends of Kevin Smith or people from the local playhouse. And considering that this was a first-time outing for almost everyone involved, I can fully forgive that. And I'm also not in a position to judge myself. Like, obviously, I edit down my own reviews in such a way that you don't hear all of my stuttering or my tripping, but trust me, I definitely do trip over my own words. But you know what? Them tripping over their own words in this film, it does add a sense of realism and authenticity to this film, which is really the best thing about Clerks. This is an indie film through and through. Clerks is contemplative, it's a bit angsty, it moves at just the right pace to allow the audience to breathe, it deals with the uncertainty and complexity of youth, it explores the fracturing of romantic relationships, it's shot in black and white. The only difference between Clerks and other indie films is that on top of all of that, it's also funny. I swear, I've seen Clerks probably half a dozen times and it still gets laughs out of me. The only reason I wouldn't consider it underground personally is just because of how popular it became. It blew up. And the reason it blew up is because everyone felt the same way about it. It felt real. It felt like these were real people dealing with real problems in an everyday situation. And the fact that Kevin Smith hired so many non-actors just really adds to the raw quality of this film. It's almost like how in post-war Italy, during their neo-realist art movement, when they casted actors for specific roles, they would typically cast unexperienced individuals, typically everyday people. That way the film would feel more authentic, instead of performed. The only difference is that unlike most Italian neo-realist films, Clerks is actually good. There's so many other things I'd just like to bring up with this film, like how the cat that's just hanging out on the quick stop counter all day feels like it's supposed to be a reference to the lion at the beginning of Dante's Inferno, how the Pringles guy that Dante helps out in the film talks like Bill Murray's character from Caddyshack. Also, how the Pringles guy getting his hands stuck inside the Pringles can is probably metaphorical for like a glutton getting trapped inside of Cerberus. Or like how in all the scenes where Jay is dancing, Jason Mewes demanded that none of the cast members were there to watch him because he was insecure about dancing in front of people. But getting to the bottom line, Clerks speaks to me so much as an individual, not only because of what the film's about, but because of what it represents. Like I said, I first saw this film when I was in college. I think I was about 21, 22 years old, so the same age as Randall and Dante. And while I do relate to the character of Randall, in the sense that he's a shit talker who's obsessed with movies, I also relate a lot to the character of Dante, in the sense that he feels aimless and guideless in his life. I have always had problems trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. I feel like a lot of people in their 20s do. And even now, I'm 26 years old, and by the time Kevin Smith was my age, he had already written, directed, and starred in 2 movies. It's easy to feel like your life is going nowhere, like you're inadequate, and even when you do achieve great things, it's easy to feel like nothing's ever really enough. But I think Clerks, as a film, does show you that you as an individual have power to improve your life, to do the things that you want to do. And considering how autobiographical most of Kevin Smith's work is, it feels very evident of his life as well. Like I said, Kevin Smith felt like he had a fire lit under him when he saw Slacker. He felt like, I have to get out and do something. I have to make something of my life. I have to make a film. And just hearing that story and listening to Kevin Smith even now, it's so inspiring and just gives me so much hope because it makes me realize that no matter what, it's never too late. Like, yeah, I'm still young, I still have the opportunities to get somewhere. But no matter what happens, if things go south, if life doesn't really go exactly the way I planned it, well, there's still an opportunity to go somewhere else. And I just find that so powerful. And that sort of leads me to this review that I'm giving now. I mentioned this in my review for the 4:30 movie. At the beginning of this year, I actually went to see a Q&A with Kevin Smith. It's actually funny, the shirt I'm wearing right now is actually the ticket to the Q&A I went to. My friend Nicole's actually the one who got me the shirt and got me to the Q&A. Big thanks to her. But, I learned a lot from Kevin Smith in that Q&A, things that I'll probably bring up in future videos that I do on his movies. But something that really stuck out to me in that Q&A is how he responded to his heart attack. Many of you may not know this, but Kevin Smith suffered a massive heart attack in 2018. The specific heart attack that he had, I believe, is colloquially known as the Widowmaker, and it kills almost every single person who has it with almost 100% guarantee. And Kevin Smith lived through that. After that experience, his doctor told him that he was basically living on borrowed time. And since then, Kevin Smith has made an effort to just live his life to the fullest, continuing the stories of the Viewer's universe, making an effort to finally lose the weight that he's been carrying around with him most of his life. And near the conclusion of the Q&A, he said that he hoped that anyone who needed a kick in the pants to get to doing what they've been putting off, that he hoped that him speaking would help with that. And it really did. This YouTube channel is something that I've been wanting to do for nearly 2 years now. I remember at the last shitty job I had, feeling a lot like Dante, I would often sit there and fantasize about the type of movies I would review, what I'd say about them. But I never sat down and actually did anything about it until a few months ago, because I didn't have the drive to do it. I was in a rough place in my life, in a lot of ways I still am. But back in August, I sat down and I said, you know what? This is something I've been wanting to do for a long time. I gotta get down and do it. And you know what? As much work as it is, it's rewarding for me. And while eventually what I'd really like to do is get involved in actual filmmaking, film criticism is something that I've always found not only valuable, but also wanted to engage in myself. I've always found the idea of breaking apart a film and looking at its individual elements to be not only incredibly interesting, but also rewarding. And taking another look at Clerks, it just reminds me that there's a lot of things in my life that I need to get to, and that my journey isn't over yet. So to conclude, thank you, Kevin Smith. Not only for making some of my favorite movies, but also inspiring me. So yeah, that was my review of Clerks. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please feel free to subscribe if you're feeling generous. You can also follow me on Instagram or Letterboxd if you want to hear more of my film takes, and I will see you later. Hey everyone, back in color so you can get visually confused again. So listen, I'm going to do the thing where I try to bribe all of you, the viewers. I really would like to get to my first 500 subscribers by the end of 2025. Fingers crossed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a cumulative giveaway. As many of you have probably noticed in my videos, I am an enormous fan of patches and pins. I collect a lot of them, and as a result, I have a lot lying around specifically for different movies. Like this Clerks patch, custom made. We can match. So if you would like this Clerks patch, all you need to do is subscribe to me and comment on this video to get entered into my cumulative raffle. As the weeks and months go on and I review more films, this giveaway pot will get bigger and bigger. Now I'm not going to include a new item with every single video, but if I have the opportunity to include a piece of merchandise related or semi-related to whatever film I'm talking about any given week, I'll include it. So, if you would like to get in on that, like I said, subscribe and comment. Once I get to my first 500 subscribers, I'll randomly select a winner, and however many things are in the pot at that point, you'll get them. Let the games begin.